wonderful that you're all here. Thank you all so much for coming. It's so wonderful to be able to see you, some of you, and know that you're all here to support me. It's really wonderful, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to hop straight in and do a little thank you to some people specifically for helping me a lot with this, for all of my friends who are here and every one of you that's here. Thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. And to Shannon specifically as well for helping me with thinking through my talk and helping with that, and for, they're not here right now, maybe they are, I don't know, but for my friends Ray, John, and Justin, who helped me hang the show as well. It means a lot to me that they were able to do that. So I am going to go ahead and just make sure that everybody is muted, and if you have any questions, there will be a time at the end where you can ask them. But if you think of something and you want to write it in the chat, that's great too. And I can read through some of those at the end if that's easier for you as well. But once again, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. So, all right. So welcome to my show. It is called Despite Everything. So when I do make my drawings, make my prints, there are three sort of main things that I am thinking about and that are prevalent within the making of each piece, or that are sort of at the forefront of my thinking. There are hints of them throughout all the pieces, but there are a specific few that it's more relevant for others. The first one of these things is comfort, and being able to find comfort in things that are uncomfortable, or in the discomfort of life. A lot of this comes through with things that I reference in my work, or things that I'm influenced by. So a lot of cartoons and video games and illustrations, specifically in children's books, and especially those that feature animal characters. So things like My Little Pony, or Adventure Time, or Moomin Valley, or in games like Animal Crossing, Undertale, Night in the Woods have been really important to me in how they're able to have storytelling that also is fun and goofy, and also has these moments of sincerity within them that that can touch you, or more meaningful. And that's something I found to be really important to me. And not only have these things sort of influenced how I think about narrative and sort of the content of my work, but they've also been very influential in my style of how I draw. So my subject matter, typically it revolves around these animal characters that I place in worlds that reflect our own in some way, while occasionally other animals such as raccoons or squirrels make their way into my work. I primarily work through things with these fox characters that I create, and they themselves provide a sense of comfort for me, as there's a cute factor to them. They feel very familiar, and I am able to project different personas onto them, and there's also room for variation within that in their shapes or in their character designs. They're also very relatable, and they allow me to think through the context that they're set in and what stories they're trying to tell, and then the snapshots of larger stories within that. So in this piece, the location of the kitchen itself becomes very comforting. A lot of the spaces that I draw are based in reality. So I referenced from the spaces that I live in, such as my home in Philadelphia and my dorm room that I live in when I'm at school, and that juxtaposition of characters that are not, they don't look like us, but they live in worlds that reflect our own, gives it a sense of approachability and makes it relatable. In thinking about comfort, I also think about lack of comfort, and there are some details from that larger piece. In thinking about comfort, I also think about lack of comfort within my work, and how in moments of panic or in times when I struggle with anxiety or dealing with harder emotions, that using my work as a way to work through some of those things. And with this specifically, having the lack of comfort and the need to be held within that, which leads me to the second thing that I think about when I make my work, which is holding. And that sort of carries a double meaning, both the act of being held and holding on to memories, things that I want to remember or I'm trying to let go of, and how making drawings or prints sort of commemorates that within, I can sort of commemorate that and think about that. So in this piece, thinking about holding very literally, both the, my desire, I created a sort of this desire to wanting to hold animals or children in my arms, and that sense of protection that comes with that. And with this piece specifically, it's a shaped print, so its borders reflect the shape of the blanket and the animal, and that sort of shape reinforces that. With this piece, that holding comes into effect with both holding on to memories of being, wanting to hold on to memories of being held and touched, especially since COVID and being a lot more isolated from people. That experience of physical touch has become a lot rarer. And so using some of my work to remember those times when that act of being held has been important to me. With this piece as well, holding on to less with the physical effect of being touched or being held, and holding on to memories of being with people, again, sort of affected by pandemic and COVID, being with people, holding on to those memories of being with people and thinking about isolation in times of gathering and what I want to remember about those times, and sort of the processing of that, of these events or these times when that I want to remember about those things. So, which leads me to my third thing that is influential and important to my work, which is processing. A lot of my work is both the processing of my thoughts and feelings, not only within the content, but within the act of making the work itself. When I'm the physical act of drawing a lithograph or drawing a print, I'm able to process the imagery of the print mentally, and during the physical making, and it looks a little bit different when I'm making a print versus when I'm making a drawing. With this piece and this piece, the hand draw elements in the, these two prints, I start with I have the initial creation of the imagery. So these, in these diner settings, and sort of what I'm thinking about is the processing of the content of again, sort of like that holding on to remembrance of being in community with people and being in gatherings, and sort of thinking about that and walking through that. And sort of then the second time that I'm processing the imagery, I think about it more technically, when I go to draw the print onto the plate or onto the stone. I think I'm able to think about the technical aspects and the perspective and the way I'm using line or pattern. And so I process that a second time, and then I afterwards with these two, there's a hand drawn element in the print in the borders, and when I'm able to then process it for a third time after, I can come back to it later and think more about what other emotions or feelings do I connect to the work after I've been sort of disconnected from its initial source of inspiration. In the case of these two, wanting to coming back to the work, thinking about making thinking about the anxiety that I have when I'm trying to order something in a restaurant, and sort of incorporating that information into the work. A big part of my artistic process is my sketchbooks, and it's the sort of initial starting place for my imagery where I can draw and doodle and sort of get things out without any sense of fear. And then I'm able to take those ideas and then translate them into more finished pieces. And when I in that sort of transferring process of taking something small and then making it larger, it allows for more sort of some improvisation, and I'm able to I'm more in a headspace if I'm thinking about the content of the work during the making, and doing more research or more things to add to it as I go. And that was really relevant with this piece specifically. And there are some details from that. So with these last two pieces, something that I also process a lot is that I process through or work through in my work is feelings associated with my own mental health. And the creation of them helps me be able to work through these feelings that are difficult in a way that is a lot more productive. And the pattern and the texture become really important to me within that, as they are familiar and comfortable, and they're able to help me sort of process a lot of those things in that way. The entire process of making this work and the task of putting up the show has by no means been an easy one, but being able to look back and remember and see everything that has come before, and being able to see myself grow through all that I've done, and that despite everything, I've made it this far. Hopefully you're able to find something in this show and my work for yourself, something that you can relate to or that helps you process or find comfort for yourself like it has for me. Thank you. And then if there are any questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask anything.
Vicky, if we can go back to look at the creamer sugar or the ordering process one.
Yeah.
I'd just like to look at them for a little while longer. I thought they were very interesting, and really a neat way to bring the rest of us who are not involved in the process of your work, but really immerse us in almost what you're thinking in your work.
Yeah.
I really like it.
Thank you. It was something that I've always been sort of looking for ways to bring more of that very intimate sketchbook process into some of my larger pieces, and finding ways to share that sort of like something that's very intimate and special to me with other people. And I'm with these prints trying to do that a little bit more. It's very exciting to try it, and it's scary to try and put yourself out there and share parts of yourself with other people. But yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
What I love about these is that they're so specific. Like there's no detail too small to be included in the scenes, but they're also so universal. Like, you know, so many people have sat at a late night diner with their friends. And so not like the tiniest details are very specific to your experience, but they're also really universal. So it would get totally drawn into your world there. So.
That's something that's a big reason too why I use sort of the animals and the foxes, is it creates a way for me to be able to talk about things that are going on with me, or to share parts of my story or what I'm doing with other people. But it allows them to be able to connect to it themselves, and it starts with me, but it doesn't end with me or have to be about me. So yeah.
I had a question, if I can ask.
Of course.
I noticed a lot about you kind of like alter the perspective that you're looking at things, like in the first one with the tree trunk, and then I saw some like your countertops. I was just wondering like the decision or choice you make behind that.
So a lot of that decision to alter the perspective sort of comes from I am able to do correct perspective, but I think there's something that's a lot more engaging about the space when it doesn't necessarily follow all of the rules of our own world. And it ties back to the idea of like me remembering, like, specifically with the larger kitchen piece at the beginning here. I'll thinking of like my fridge. If I'm looking at my fridge like that, I can't necessarily see all the sides of it from a certain perspective, but being able to having those aspects that might be hidden otherwise are important for me to want to show, because I think it gives you a fuller sense of the space and adds to some of the emotive quality of what's going on, and some of that tension between the characters and the environments that they're in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I have seen your sketchbooks, and they always blow me away. Not just because of the technical stuff, but it really shows the progression of your thoughts and emotions. And sometimes they're just raw. Sometimes they start raw and then they resolve. Sometimes they don't. So with all the interior spaces that you go in your sketchbooks, how do you pick the ones that become the larger projects, the ones that you want to adapt and then try to bring other people into?
Yeah, so that has the sort of process of finding something in my sketchbook that I want to further expand upon. It just has a lot to do with how I'm feeling. If I'm being honest, having the and choosing something that I'm personally connecting with. And sometimes too, I'll do a sketch and I'm not connecting with it, but then I'll go back later and I'll look through old sketchbooks or work that I've done like years ago, and I'll have a different connection or a different association that I'm making with something. And so taking that and then thinking about, when I make it into a larger piece, what can I expand upon with this? What further details can I add? And that's something that's also sort of helps me in those times of like anxiety or really struggling to process something or to deal with something, is being able to have these larger drawings that then have all these smaller, more intimate details, and having that ability to get up really close and personal with something, in addition to having it be a larger thing. Yeah, I don't know if that fully answered your question, but
Hi, Victoria.
hi, Dad.
I wanted to ask about the ones with the inset part. Those two, maybe you can bring one up. Was that, you said, and maybe I just lost perspective on what you were saying. Do you work from the inside out or the outside in? I thought you said you sort of do.
So with these ones, so I'll start with every piece, I start in my sketchbook and I'll make some drawings or some sketches of like, what do I want this work to be about? What if I'm creating for class or for myself? And then with these ones, these are waterless litho plates. And so I will then, typically you will then you'll transfer your drawing onto the plate and then go through the process of printing it. Mm-hmm. And then these are monoprints of the, so they're hand manipulated. So they're not every single one is exactly like these.
So the whole plate is this.
So the whole plate is the black and red portion in the center.
Oh.
And then afterwards, I'll come back with with these two. I've come back with just like a fine liner pen, and I'll add additional information to it as I'm thinking further about the imagery that I've produced.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then I know in the other one with excused ? There's it's like it's an icon.
Yeah.
Are the cats in the other one like sort of a medieval manuscript animals in the marginalia? I was just thinking it's what it said to me, the little cat leaning over. It's like medieval marginalia, maybe. I don't know if you think.
So I wasn't specifically thinking about that. I was more trying to get a similar feeling of sort of that sketchbook or sort of that sort of automatic process to it, and treating it treating this page sort of as I would if it was something just like tucked away in my sketchbook that nobody else would necessarily see. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
I love it.
Thank you.
I do too.
Thanks, Grammy.
Actually, I like the first one, and I like the one called Tremble.
Thank you. I can go back to that.
That one. I love it.
Thank you.
Hey, Victoria, could you tell us a bit more about your choice with color?
Yeah, of course. So color, I've had an interesting relationship, I guess, with color. When I typically, when I'm working in my sketchbook or when I'm doing screen prints or other forms of drawing, I'm typically very like, I'll use a lot of color and I'll use a lot of very bright color, and it has a different sense and tone to it. And then when I started doing lithography, which is a printmaking process where you are taking a stone and drawing on it with a very greasy material and then treating it with a bunch of different chemicals in order to make a print from that. And so with that, you can do color lithography, but it's a lot more difficult. And so something that one of my professors really pushed me to think about when I started doing lithography is shape and texture and pattern and perspective, and how I'm able to utilize those things in order to make the image sort of stand out. And so because I was working a lot with lithography, a lot of my drawings, I wanted to really focus on that shift to defining things or separating things with pattern and texture rather than relying on color. And so that just sort of stuck, and then just sort of gravitating towards the color red in a lot of these as a way to highlight specific areas. And for a lot of them, it just sort of made sense to use red, like with the tomato, like tomatoes are typically red. And then with this burger piece, this is a 2-color lithographic image. So both the red and the black are printed material as opposed to added back in with hand coloring. But again, the red made sense with the sort of the ketchup and those sort of things within it. Yeah.
Hey, Victoria, can you
Yeah.
go back to the one with the eggs and the little guy on the floor?
Of course, Brian.
And actually one more back.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So and then one forward. So I'm looking on the fridge and I'm looking at the wow right there, and like there's like shading on that, and it almost looks like kind of 3D, but it's like a really small detail. So like how big, how physically big are these?
So this drawing and the other the other drawing sort of at the end, this one is about, it's like slightly larger than 22 by 30 inches. So they're fairly large, and I typically will use very sharp pencils or mechanical pencils. And with this one, I've been able to I was hanging it on the wall of my studio. And so I was able to get very, very close up to the work, and being able to have that sense of like intimacy within the detail. And I think it's definitely really difficult to tell scale on Zoom. But that aspect of being very physically close to the work, I think, is really important, especially sort of going back to my sketchbooks. It's something that's very close to me usually, and that being able to get very close to it, I think, really influences both content and technical stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so I have a question in the chat from Marilee and Ezra, and he asks, how long does it take you to make one of your pieces? So that varies from piece to piece. With the lithographs, which are the printed material, it takes a little bit longer because there's more of a process to going and doing it. You have to wait a lot of time for the chemicals to treat the stone properly and do what they need to do to make the image print. And so those will typically take a couple of days, especially from the initial process of the initial start of making the drawing and transferring the drawing and then going through the entire printing process. The smaller drawings, like the ones at the end here, that are a little bit smaller, they take a couple of hours. So only I think I did this one and this one both in the same day, or one the next day, one day and then the other the next day. And then with these larger drawings, they take me a couple of days to finish, just depending on how long every day I'm working on it for, or like the amount of detail or things that I'm adding into the piece.
If it breaks, if the glass breaks, or only.
I have a question. So there's a lot of different types of shadings that you end up using in your pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific like decision that you put behind which shadings you use for different portions?
Not a whole lot. I'm really drawn to these sort of scribbly textures that you can see in here, and in this piece you can see it in the window And definitely here, that really sort of scribbly, almost crayon-like effect that you get. I usually will, with the fur on some of the foxes, that becomes, it's a way to denote fur. I'll try and, for different surfaces as well. I think this piece is a good example of that, because it's a little bit difficult to see, but there's different textures in both like the frying pan and the way the fur is denoted on the raccoon, and the paneling on the side of the cabinet. And so a lot of it has to do with the surface of the objects that I'm drawing. So yeah, Trip, I can speak to that. So the question is, we've seen animals that says they've watched me draw and stuff for the past 4 years, and seen animals and characters in my work. Can you speak to how your art has grown, your process of which animals you have kept and developed, and which ones you have let go? Absolutely. So I'm trying to just thinking for a second. So I've always been really drawn to and these animals as subject matter. And as I've been sort of developing the characters and the things that I work with, they've become a lot more anthropomorphic, as ways to sort of give that relatability to it, and they're able to interact in the more human world, if that makes sense. Earlier pieces, this is the earliest piece that I have in the show, and the animals are a lot more, what's the word? They're a lot more naturalistic, on 4 legs and not as reminiscent of humans. And I think like 2 years ago, I really started working with raccoons in my pieces. This is a more recent piece, but drawn initially to the way that their markings and how I could define their pattern or the texture of their fur through that. And then sort of morphing off of that, I was really drawn to sort of the shape of these like pointed noses and the pointy ears, and then like the billowy bushy tails. So the shape of the animal became very important to me. And then with the thought, then sort of developing that into these fox characters specifically, mostly because I'm able to get a lot more variation within them. So with this piece specifically, like they're all foxes, and they all sort of fit together in, they're all stylistically the same, but through markings and ear shape and things like that, I'm able to make their characters more distinct. So yeah.
Victoria, I had a quick question just to follow up on that.
Yeah, of course.
It's been so lovely to see your style evolve over the years. And I guess I wonder, as you look back over your college time, are there ways in which the way that your style has evolved has surprised you or been a somewhat unexpected, where you've ended up here now is maybe not what you thought, where you thought you'd be when you first started out?
Absolutely. Definitely. It's even different from this show, and what it ended up being was a lot different than even how I imagined it being like 2 years ago. And I think lithography definitely really changed how I think about what's important to me in my work and what I gravitate towards. Yeah, the subject matter has also gotten a little bit, it's gotten more focused too, which I think is really exciting. When I was sort of first starting out, I had a bunch of ideas, but didn't really know where to fully go with them. But being able to sort of see that more direction more direction within it, and being able to develop like further narrative and things like that. Definitely. When I was doing for people who don't know, for the degree program that I'm in your sophomore year, sophomore and junior year, you have to have a review of the work you've made up until that point, to sort of see like what you're making and where you're going for your show. And all of my work there was, it was very colorful, and it had the worlds were a lot more fantastical. And so seeing this work now where it's all grayscale, black and white with pops of red, and being set more in reality, I think is a really interesting direction that it's gone in, for sure.
Yeah, so I think that's just fabulous because, obviously one of our family members owns one of your artworks from an earlier epic. And so we're looking forward to all the various epics of Victoria Duggan as they evolve. So we're going to have to be sure to collect one from each era.
Thank you. Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I appreciate that.
I was thinking the same thing, and was glad Tina asked that question, because you did foxes in high school when you did a comic book contest thing with a homeschool curriculum place that you won an award for, but those foxes were totally naturalistic, and these are very different, and it's fun to see the change and the growth in both you and your art as you work through who you are and what you want to say with it. And it's really encouraging to see that, because I've seen even more sketchbooks than Debbie, and you've really come a long way and moved through a lot of different ways that you can express yourself. So I'm just being a proud mom. Sorry.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mom. Yeah, it's definitely really, really interesting to look back and sort of see the progression. And that sort of goes back to that, like, despite everything, like despite all of what's come before, it's still me. And I think that even looking back at like older work or older sketchbooks and things, there's something that's very distinctly me within all of it. And I think that carries through. My work is a very, very much so an extension of myself that I'm putting out there. So.
I have a question. So a friend of mine that I went to college with started out in architecture. She moved through cabinet making and metalworking and all these different, like, woodwork, a bunch of different things. And she's now doing jewelry making, and she went to school again for jewelry making. So I love watching, that progression of different styles and different materials that you use. So is there anything that you want to do that you haven't done yet? And that's like, are you just like, oh, I'm totally done and I don't need to worry about next? Or are you like, oh, I really wish I had done this kind of thing and I haven't done that yet? Is there something like noodling next?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in making stuff that's a little bit more sculptural, or that has some more of that, like, that physicality to it. Physicality is really important to me in making, and I think that's why I'm really drawn to sort of the printmaking and drawing processes, is because there's a lot of that, like, analog, like, you're up there and you're working with materials and you're doing that sort of thing. So it's something that I'm interested in sort of looking at a little bit, but I'm also comfortable sort of where I am and what I'm doing. It's interesting though, you reminded me that, like, the way I work is very, the materials that I use when I'm making really influence the way that I think about the work that I'm making. Specifically in, like, the differences between some of my screen prints or my paintings versus the work that I have here. It's just interesting to think about. But yeah.
Could you go back to that last one?
Yeah.
And I it's less of a question, more of like just a comment of something that I
Yeah.
like about a lot of these pieces is the use of like depth. in like all of them, and in this one, that's a mirror, right?
Yes.
Like that's pretty cool. I like how like you have that depth, and you've like drawn the stuff that we can't see in like the mirror and stuff. It's cool.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Are there any other questions?
You've had a very, very great show. And I love the way you talked about them.
Thank you,
and
Grammy.
explained them. Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you, Grammy.
Can you run through the show again? Just one more tour through.
I
please?
absolutely can.
I love the squirrel with the tomato. It reminds me of the summer.
Yeah, so that was very specifically inspired.
Because they ate all my tomatoes, not me.
I was very specifically inspired by my mother trying to grow tomatoes over the summer, and them consistently grabbing them and eating them. So yeah, he chomped, exactly.
Can you talk about Excused?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So this piece specifically, I was thinking a lot about sort of themes connected with my Christian faith and those beliefs. Sort of looking at the sort of overarching theme of like the garden and the fall through like and the eating of the fruit within that, and then the sort of communion aspect through Christ, and then the sort of the bird and the jug sort of representing like the baptism or the Holy Spirit, and sort of like that triangulation of these three events within that. And then like, yeah. So that's sort of what that, sort of reflecting on that and thinking about that. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Because to me that gives off major vibes of being a child and being mortified to ask to be excused from the dinner table.
Right. Well,
that was the vibe I was getting.
That was sort of the other thing that was going into that as well, is that sort of fear of like, I have a very specific memory of sitting in somebody's house when I was a kid and being like, I have to ask to be excused from the table, and I have to ask this person who I don't know very well, and I'm very mortified of having to ask for this thing, and sort of reflecting on like those themes of like food and eating, and how that relates to how I relate that to those themes sort of in the Bible as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there an element of like not wanting to draw attention to yourself and not wanting to be the focus of all of these symbols?
Absolutely.
Like too much to handle?
Yeah, that's another big reason why I sort of have adopted these animal anthropomorphic cutesy kind of characters as a way to not like wanting to share and wanting to talk about things, or wanting to sort of express parts of myself to other people, but that fear of like, do I really want everybody to know all of these things about me and what I'm dealing with? Not really, but it's a part of me, and I want to make work about it and share that. So using the foxes and using the animals as a way for me to sort of like share that, but not make it fully about me. Yeah.
I think that's really healthy, because it kind of helps you to hold what's going on at arm's length and gives you a space to, like you said, processing.
Yeah.
It gives you a space to play with it.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I think the other thing with that too, which someone else pointed out in one of their questions is it allows me to relate my own experience into your art or your experience. It's not just me looking at, oh, this artist who has stuff I can't relate to. Like sometimes art can do that to you. Most of these pieces allow me to put some of my own self into them, not just because some of them are of my kitchen, but allow me to put myself into them in a way that I can draw on and work through my own stuff independent of what some of your initial intents in that picture might be. And I think that's a really positive and useful thing in art. So it makes it more accessible.
That's a big part of my intention in what I do and with my current practice is really wanting, whether it's you connect to something deeper within it, or if you're just scrolling through my feed or find one of my pieces or see one of them and you're like, wow, that's really cute. That really made me smile, or that made my day, or something like that. To me makes it successful because it's given somebody else something positive in their life, or it's helped them either smile or you've connected to something within it. So that's definitely something that's been really important to me in what I've been doing. Yeah.
Hey Vicky, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I get the sense that a lot of your pieces represent like something you're working through, or kind of like an ongoing thing that you might be working through. Are some of your pieces representations of like particular stories or like specific moments or like events? What is is there some of that too? I don't know.
Some of them are a little bit more specific. Some of them are a little bit more vague, and some of them are sort of like amalgamations of like, so like with the diner pieces specifically, it's not necessarily like one specific moment when I was in a diner, but sort of the like several times that I've been in a diner, and sort of like, what do I remember from that? Well, I remember these menus, and I remember the kind of booth that we were sitting in, and I remember the amount of people that I was with, or things like that. So it sort of varies from piece to piece, and sort of like what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Are there any other questions?
I shall say good night.
That's very, I was just gonna say, unless there are any other questions.
I loved it. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you all for coming again. And if you have anything else come up that you have a question or a thought or just something else, I'm pretty sure all of you know my Instagram, or have some other form of contacting me. You can feel free to reach out anytime. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It means so much to me, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your day to be here. So
Brava.
Bye.